And we want to thank all of you for taking the time to watch our podcast today. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the American States Assemblies podcast. I'm one of your hostesses, Tammy Healy on New Jersey, and I serve the New Jersey Assembly as our outreach committee head. And in fact, if you are on New Jersey, we're going to be at the Rockaway Mall this Saturday, October 7th. There is a Patriot convoy that's going to be there, and that was organized by Bob and Dorothy from the Our Town newspaper that some of you may be aware of. We do our advertising in there with the New Jersey Assembly, but we're going to be there passing out our brochures and meeting all the wonderful New Jerseyans. But if you can't make that event, you can log on to our website. We have it scrolling across the bottom of the screen right now. And you can look for another event that we host, and we do plenty of them all throughout the month. We'd love to get to meet you and introduce ourselves to you and explain what we're doing and what we're about. So make sure you log on and catch us at one of our events. Our other hostess is Michelle Ford on California. And Michelle serves the California Assembly as their state coordinator. And Michelle also hosts online Common Law 101 classes every Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time and Thursdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time. I'm sure you would, I'm just going to put her link up there so you guys can catch that and get to one of her classes through that link. So Michelle and I started these podcasts because we wanted to introduce the world to all the amazing men and women across our country that is standing up and doing the reconstruction that should have taken place over 150 years ago of our government after the Civil War took place. And we have just amazing people that love this country so much and are really working hard at reconstructing and basically rebooting their government on their state. And so that's the purpose of these podcasts. And so if you haven't gotten a chance to come on our podcast, we would love to get your state and use our platform to introduce the world to your assembly. And ultimately, we want to get the people to correct their status and free them from slavery and bring them back as a free American once again. So you can reach out to me on this email and set up a time for us to interview your state. And or I'm also on Mattermost. You can reach out to me there. So we have a very special guest with us today. And although she needs no introduction, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce you all to the fiduciary of our Lawful American Government, the Unincorporated Federation of States, Justice Anna von Reitz. Thank you, Anna, for coming on, and welcome. Oh, you're muted, Anna. Hold on.
All right, try that.
There you go.
All right. Okay, here we are.
Yes.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing everything that you're doing in support of our country and our people. This is a very large scale, very difficult, challenging, awe-inspiring effort by many, many people. And I guess I am obliged to think of it in terms of phases or stages or maybe stair steps or plateaus. This all started at the Civil War. And immediately after the Civil War, the members of the Federation government were beset upon by the members of the Union Army. And they were systematically attacked, burned out of their homes, murdered, forced to flee, and our own family was forced to flee all the way to the Northwest Territories at that time, where this knowledge and the history had been preserved against all odds all these many years. But I don't mind telling you that by 2001, all hope had seemingly vanished, and it seemed to be just something historical. And at that point, my husband's mother finally decided on her deathbed to convey all this to her son. He had been kept in the dark all of his life to protect him. So, and then I, of course, had followed a completely different route in life and in interest to learn that was just one of those pop-up interruptions. I had followed a completely different path to learn about the corruption of the government and the agencies and the many, many problems that there are that exist within our government. So it was sort of an unimaginable bringing together of history and facts and research that ultimately had been accomplished by generations of people prior to us. So I guess you could say there's that entire time period and all of those many, well, thousands of people who one way or another preserved and brought forward and remembered and, you know, kept documents stored in various places and who kept the fire alive as an ember, if you will, all those many years, plus all of the researchers like myself in prior generations who also kind of woke up and said, you know, this doesn't smell right. There's something wrong here. And they also did research and brought forward pieces of the puzzle so that we could prove what we needed to prove when the time came.
So I think that a lot of people, because you're the face of the Federation, and, you know, people don't realize how many of you collectively came together with all the information and figured this out together. You know, well, it's like each of you brought your own little piece to the puzzle and collaboratively, you know, laid out that puzzle and created the picture that you are bringing forth for us today.
Right. It is absolutely a gigantic, world-spanning collaborative effort. And we would not be here today if it were not for freedom-loving and humanitarian friends in other countries who have come forward and have joined the effort and have presented us with gifts of knowledge and records that we didn't have. I mean, it's been just fabulous. The international networking that has gone on here to make it possible for us to have a complete picture and to have documents that establish the picture in time. So we have a great debt to historians in England, for example. We have a great debt to Curtis Kallenbach, who researched almost single-handedly the entire history of the dead baby estate used by the church. Then we have great debts to Romley Stewart and others in Australia who came forward with all the research on dog Latin and who solved the mystery of the all capital letters name and the use of all capital letters. So, you know, anywhere you look, Canadian Mary Croft contributed humongously to just the simple methodology of representing oneself in court. Gene Seating and his prison treatise and his knowledge of admiralty and maritime law, invaluable. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I could spend the rest of the evening just naming names and telling you what different people and different groups have contributed to all of this over time.
Me and Pete are out. Pete's taken care of.
Thank you.
Hi, Shannon.
And I would just add too. Was that Shannon?
Yeah, that was Shannon.
Shannon, he has been graciously helping me throughout this difficult day. He has a truck that is fully competent to deal with icy roads, and so he kindly picked me up out of my dilemma and packed me here so I could be here tonight.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, let him know we're very grateful for his help.
I am too. I'll tell you what. There are times when you get into a situation where you're just kind of caught flat-footed and you know it's not safe to drive under the conditions. And so it's wonderful when you have someone that will drop everything and come help you.
Yeah, it's really nice to have somebody like that, for sure. Getting back to what you were saying previously, I wanted to add that it's so nice to hear history given to us in the way that you have presented it. I was one of those students in school where I didn't do well in history because I hated learning about wars and learning about having to memorize all the names of all the colonels and, you know, the men that were responsible for all the wars, and then the dates and all those things. And so I never did well in history. I never saw any value in history. I was more of a futuristic, let's move forward. And it's not until, you know, in my 40s where I find this history is so valuable and I feel like I just can't even get enough of it.
Yeah.
I just want to keep reading and I want to keep listening. And I've got, I don't know, 10 books on my floor where I've read like 2-3 chapters and then gone on to something else. And then I go back to it again. But it's just so much to learn. Sometimes it's overwhelming, but it's fascinating. It really is fascinating, especially all the people that have, kind of decoded all this chicanery and deceit that's taken place. You know, that's brilliancy right there. I mean, as sad as it is, and being angry about what they really have done to us, but getting back to the people that were actually able to figure it out is just really fascinating to me.
Well, we have a lot of national mourning and a lot of national gratitude to express to people like Bill Benson, who definitively proved that the 16th Amendment was never ratified by any state of the Union, by people that have individually contributed to the cause worldwide, like John Anthony Hill, who prosecuted Queen Elizabeth II.
That's a fascinating story.
Yeah, and I think that everybody here needs to realize just how many people over what a span of time have kept the American dream alive and who have preserved the history of this country. I was exceptionally lucky that when I was growing up in Wisconsin, going through a public school, we still had 2 history books. One was called American History, and one was called United States History. And these 2 books dealt with different subjects, and it was obvious that they were different subjects and that we were talking about different forms of government operating in different jurisdictions. So I was blessed to grow up with that basic knowledge right there in front of my face that these were two separate subjects, not one.
Yeah, so we lived in Texas for 5.5 years, and my kids my two older boys went to middle school and high school up till about we moved where my oldest was in the middle of his sophomore year. But anyway, he brought home in their curriculum, they were taught both American and U.S. history. And I remember him bringing his book home and being like, why do they have to call it two different things? Isn't it one and the same? And so I started questioning it back then. And then, you're just so busy. It just goes right over your head. And, I didn't take a look through the book to see if, there was any different. I think maybe I did the table of contents, to see what they'd be discussing. And it was just your typical, stuff they go over. And, but it was interesting that they still had a book called American History, and they had a book called U.S. History. That was going back, I guess that was 4 years ago now.
Wow.
Well,
so
that's
recent.
exceptional. That's exceptional because most countries, most states, do not do that anymore. Most of them study United States history, and they make that as boring as possible so that, well, it is a plot. It is a purposeful thing to make history seem dull and unimportant, and to just give it lip service within the curriculum,
Right?
So that people remain ignorant of who they are and what their rights are, and where those contracts exist and how they can enforce them. All of the information that we need to enforce our constitutions, for example, our peace treaties, all of that is contained in our history. And if we don't know or study our history, then we're left defenseless by anyone who wants to tell us whatever kind of story they're going to tell us and push us around and assume authorities that they don't have, and all these other things that we've suffered over the past, I would say it's been worse in this present generation, but think about it. There have been 6 generations of people who have lived and died in this country since the end of the Civil War.
Yeah.
And, the farther you get away from the nexus where it all began, where the problem started, the harder it is for people to understand what actually happened back then.
Yeah.
Now,
and I think it's done all intentionally.
Oh, yes, it is. By those that stand to gain from this situation that we've had here. Of course, they want to keep it all secret and hush-hush, and that's why we have all these secret societies. That's why we have all this national security.
Right.
All this other stuff. They're trying to keep us dumbed down and helpless, and keep us in a political status that doesn't allow us to enforce our contracts. And fortunately, we've been able to discern and research and find our way home again. But it has not been an easy struggle by any means. And I guess I would also count myself lucky in that I had grandparents that were actually alive at the time of the Civil War. Because, because I am the youngest of the youngest of the youngest. And so my grandmother was 78 when I was born. And yet she lived long enough. The first 9 years of my life, I had my grandmother. And her husband, my grandfather, had been born in 1865.
Wow.
So they were much more contemporaneous with the actual history. And between what he remembered and told her, and then what she remembered and told my mother, and, everything was very fortuitous. Because in our family, we still discussed things about the Civil War and about World War I and about the Great Depression, because the people there that I was living with had lived through it, or had immediately their parents had lived through it, and they remembered, and they talked about it.
Yeah.
And so I
My
had a
My grandmother was born around the time of the Great Depression. She was born in 21. And the funny thing is that when I think my father was trying to apply for something for her, some kind of benefit, because my grandfather was a veteran for the Navy, and he was more of like an entrepreneur, and kind of had jobs on and off, and he died at a very young age, and she was, I think, 11 years younger than him. So she didn't work, and so when she, at the time that he died, he didn't leave her much. So I think my father was trying to help and get her, some kind of Social Security or some kind of benefits. And when he was applying for it, she didn't have a birth certificate. Everybody was freaking out, like, why doesn't she have a birth certificate? Where is it? And I remember thinking, that's odd. She's got to have a birth certificate. And now thinking back, knowing what I know now, I'm like, oh, well, I know why she doesn't have a birth certificate.
They weren't issuing birth certificates much prior to that. My mother was born in 1920. And my grandmother was born in 1880. And the man she married, my grandfather, was born in 1865. So being able to talk to people who were close enough to the events to remember enough about them and to discuss them was just a precious gift in all of this research that we subsequently had to go through, because I kept remembering bits and pieces that I'd been told as a child.
Yeah, and thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
Anna, are you okay if we start with some of these questions?
Absolutely.
All right. So our first question is, could you explain the differences between being a self-governing individual and working collaboratively together as an assembly?
Well, that strikes me as kind of an odd question, because I think that most of us are well aware of the process that we go through as we mature in defining what we value as individuals, and therefore how we comport ourselves and what we express to the rest of the world. It's a maturation that goes on in each of our lives that defines, in the end, who we are. And that is the crux of all government and all governance. And it comes down ultimately to the ancient Greek saying, know thyself. We go through this entire process, despite all of the things that come flying in at us from the surrounding world and from our parents and from the institutions and all of that. We still have to come to an understanding of who we are, what we value, what we believe or don't believe. And then based on our thought process and our logic and our feeling, we determine our own self-governance. We go through this process of testing and we make basic decisions like, do we ultimately value the truth and make it our personal rule that we don't lie? Or do we see the convenience of lying, as the song says, nobody tells the truth anymore because it's easier to lie?
That's a song?
Oh, that's a song. I heard it on the radio just the other day.
Yes, I heard it too.
And it's the sort of thing where that individuation that takes place is so ultimately important in determining what we do with our lives, what we value, what we sacrifice for, what we spend our time on, who we spend it with. Everything is kind of at the core, that process of coming to know yourself and to express yourself. And that is self-governance. Those sorts of practical decisions and moral decisions, and the kind of acuity that you develop over time, your discernment of what's right for you and what's wrong for you without any judgment of what's right or wrong for anybody else. That's
Right.
self-governance. That's, what goes on in you all the time. And, if anything, when we're talking about self-governance, we're talking about kicking it up a notch, in the immortal words of Emeril Lagasse. We're kicking it up a notch in terms of forcing ourselves to look with discernment at that process and at the decisions we've made. Because many of us make decisions without being truly conscious of them. And still more of us make decisions because the circumstance of our lives is dictating to us what we have to do at any given moment. And at the end of the day, what often happens is you wake up at age 30 or somewhere thereabouts, and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, this isn't me. This isn't the way I want to live. This isn't what I believe in. And you make choices. Often those are very hard choices. And you either slump back into the semi-consciousness of youth, or you take it on the chin and you go forward with courage to express who you truly are and what you believe in and how you're going to govern your life. You stop being guided by others and start being guided by yourself. And this all takes place for each of us at a different rate and to a different extent. I mean, I know people who did everything in their lives on schedule.
Call me when you're done. Cody's being he forgot his girlfriend's pay. I just paid him out of my pocket.
Understand?
And he's generous too.
He's a prince. And he takes care of things for me when I'm otherwise engaged. But anyway, this whole process, one of the songs that really impressed me was Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror.
Oh, yeah.
That inevitable day when you look at yourself and you look at your world and you make changes. You decide that, I may have spent my whole life doing what other people told me to do and believing what other people told me to believe. But suddenly I'm seeing myself and it's only me in the mirror. And so what am I going to do about it? Where am I going to take my stand?
And it's interesting because we've been taught in our schools, right, to just follow authority. We don't question authority. We just do what we're told. So by the time we become adults, by the time we get to adulthood, there's that indoctrination and brainwashing that has taken place. And it takes a while, I think, for people to come out of that phase and start feeling empowered. A lot of people I know live in victimhood and they just think they have no power. They can't change anything. What am I going to do? I'm only one person, and, that's a very sad place for them to be in, that they feel powerless. So again, going back to the whole indoctrination of our children starting in the schools. Hopefully that's something that we can change.
Well, if you think about it, it's far more systemic even than that. It starts from the moment you're born. From the moment you're born, you're handed a identity. You're handed a name. Most of us are handed a position in a family. Most of us are, all of us are given a race. We're all, tagged as white, black, whatever. And most of us are tagged with a religion as well. And, we're Protestant, we're Catholic, we're Jewish, whatever. All of these different things get laid on us almost instantaneously, along with, oh, you're an American. Oh, you're Irish. You have this national identity thrust upon you. And all of these things are just handed to us kind of like gifts. You come off the assembly line and, you take up your uniform, and you take up your towel, and you take up your brand, and you go wandering off the stage, right? And all of this is just kind of given to us, like our given name. I mean, it used to fascinate me, why am I an Anna instead of a Grace? Well, it was just completely arbitrary, as far as anyone knows, that it was just happened to be a name that the family had liked over time. And so I inherited that name. All right. Okay. But that doesn't mean I had anything to say about it. That wasn't an issue of self-governance. That was me being governed by the country, by the society, by the culture, by the family, all these different things. It was just given to me, and I didn't have much of a choice to stop and think about it or question it. And I think that it's important that we do. We need to really think about who we are. And, I, over the years, have had many occasions to question things that I was told as a child. And not necessarily because the people that were telling me this were lying. They simply weren't thinking. They weren't checking the information themselves. And so they were passing on this intergenerational lie or an intergenerational prejudice. We are still suffering over the issues of race in this country.
Right.
It had largely died out, but then it just keeps kind of coming back like dandelions in spring.
I blame the colleges. I blame the colleges for that. They're like,
well, and the whole victimhood mentality. Everybody's searching for some basis in which to claim victimhood, as if that were anything to claim or want. Mm-hmm. And but we keep seeing these intergenerational throwbacks of issues that never get put to rest. That are just sort of preserved as a bad continuing meme. And we all know about memes in terms of marketing and cyber profiteering and marketing and all that. What's the latest meme on TikTok, right? Well, memes actually predate all of that considerably, and what they're talking about are the insidious ideas that get planted in our brains as small children, and that we accept without any discretion or judgment. And then those things have a tendency to lock in and guide us the rest of our days because we don't even question them. We're not aware that we took this garbage in the first place.
Yeah.
So then we don't kick it out. And we need to, I have friends who live their entire lives on a schedule that somebody else set for them. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding at all. They graduated high school at 18. They graduated from college at 22. They married immediately out of college or within 4 years afterward, depending on whether they went to master's or PhD programs. But as soon as they finished that higher education, they got married. And, they just plodded right along in the pathway. Here's the wagon rut, follow it. And so they had their 2.2 children, and they they followed the script, and they're horribly unhappy, most of them who did that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because my two older sons graduated high school, and the oldest didn't really know what he wanted to do. He actually wanted to play baseball, but he wasn't good enough to get a scholarship to go to a great college that has a great baseball team. So he figured he'd stay home, save some money, go to community college, and have an opportunity to play baseball there. That didn't work out for, other reasons. But he's still trying to figure out what he wants to do. And then my second son graduated high school last year. He was supposed to start community college this year. Obviously, he was both of them were getting pressure from grandparents that, because they were the top of their class. They, had my oldest son had an invitation to apply for Harvard because his SATs or his ACT tests were very high in science. So they're both really smart, but and I think because they're smart, they knew that they didn't want to spend a lot of money on a four-year college, especially if they didn't know what they wanted to study. So we didn't put any pressure on them. My second son has finally figured out that he wants to try becoming an electrician. So he's starting in that field now and might be starting an apprenticeship in the spring. And my older one feels pressure to either figure out if he's going to continue on to a four-year college or if he's going to go in the work field. And, he's really trying to figure it out. And my advice to him was, now's the time in your life to take your time, figure out what your God-given talents are, what that calling is for you. You don't want to have a job. You don't want to have a career. You want to have a calling in life. And that is going to be something that, God places on your heart. And it's something that you enjoy doing. And that, I had a professor in school that said to me, just figure out what it is you enjoy doing. And you can always figure out how to make money doing it. So that was my advice to my sons. And they keep getting pressure from their grandparents because like your friends that you're talking about, they had this timing, that they had to do this and then they had to do that. And, and it's all about the status quo and how it makes them look if their grandchildren aren't going to, a four-year college. I'm sure they wanted to be able to brag that they got accepted to, Harvard or Yale or wherever, but
my son's a doctor.
Yes. And they're just on their own path. And I'm okay with that. I have no pressure for them. I want them to find their way.
Well, that's self-governance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's learning self-governance at a very individual, very personal basis. And that is the basis for everything else. I mean, until we each individually learn to know and accept and practice our own morality, for example, our own ethics. Are the American ethics something that we espouse? Who knows? We know what the American ethics are, but that doesn't mean that individual Americans will care about them and practice them. There are so many different things involved here that knowing who you are is a fundamental part of knowing where you fit in the world. If you're an American by birth, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are American in terms of your philosophy or of your basic values or your ethics, right?
Yeah.
And over time, what happens is that we have this wonderful thing, the American melting pot. And we take in all that is best of all these other cultures, and we assimilate all of this information just like we assimilate all the different cuisines of the world. We don't realize how lucky we are that we can walk down the street and we can go to an Italian restaurant, we can go to a Thai restaurant, we can go to a Polish restaurant, we can go to a German restaurant. We have all these different cuisines of the world, curries, everything. And that's part of the melting pot. That's part of Americans being Americans and being who they are. But over the years, I think that the emphasis, at least in the public schools, has diminished to a point where people don't get a real strong sense of, okay, well, what is it to be an American? We get all this ancient stuff about George Washington and the cherry tree and a bunch of, la-di-da, and the Statue of Liberty, which isn't even a statue of anything that we should be associated with.
Right. That's right. Astra. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't think we're just sort of handed this bill of goods and we live our lives accordingly. And you cannot be self-governing if that's the position that you're just going to toe, because it takes more than that. It takes discernment. It takes thought. It takes questioning. And it takes the gradual growth of courage and moral fortitude and strength of character to be able to do the work and do what has to be done to bring forward this country in the way that our forefathers built it. John Adams said that it was impossible for us to have this kind of government with an ignorant population. And, he placed the highest value on educating our children and our grandchildren about all of the issues of individual self-governance, and then moving on to governance within a family, governance within a community, governance within a county, a state, an entire world. And it really is a very similar process of coming to grips with the truth about yourself, and at least the truth of how your government is supposed to be functioning and structured, and taking your responsibility for making it function in the way it was intended. Now, I am as cowardly as the next person, and I'm as lazy as the next person, and I am very, I was grandma sitting there on my velvet tuffet in Big Lake, Alaska, and I didn't want to move any more than anybody else did, right? But a number of things kind of catapulted me out of the doldrums. And number one was the realization that if I didn't stand up and do something about it, then I would be complicit. I would become an accomplice in a crime, and I would become an accomplice in letting down generations of people who suffered and fought and died for this country. And those were things about myself that I was not willing to accept. I was not willing to be an accomplice to crime. And I was not willing to let down all those all those past generations and all the future generations of Americans that are, frankly, depending on me. And so just as an individual with nothing more than that realization that, okay, well, if the torch is going to be tossed in the mud, it's not going to be me who does it. I'm going to have to stand up and do something about this. And at the time I stood up, I had no idea what that would be, or how we were going to accomplish what we have accomplished so far. It was just a complete and utter, like walking into a blizzard and not knowing one hand in front of the axe, just having known that you had to do something, but how you were going to do it was all of that, and when, where, how, and why, all those questions. It comes down to the question of what, what do you want? Do you want the American dream to falter and fade and be vanished from the world and have these corporate goons ruling over you? Yes or no?
No.
What do you want?
No.
That's an easy one. No.
And what kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to set yourself free by telling the truth? Or do you want to, lie and stifle yourself until you can't even stand to look at yourself in the mirror?
Yeah, and that one little thing about lying, because I think that some people don't even realize the smallest lies that they tell, either to themselves or, something as silly as, calling out sick to work, right? But you're really not sick,
Right.
and the society that has built this system of lies, right? Because they won't allow us the freedom to tell the truth, right? Like, I'd like to just say, hey, I just need a mental health day today.
Right.
I'm a little stressed out, and I'm afraid I might get sick. So I really need to just take the day off. Are you okay with that? And it's like you can't even be honest.
Right. Or you have to be politically correct.
Right. Yeah.
God forbid that you call someone black.
Right.
Or white.
Well,
Or,
I had a conversation with somebody because from my understanding, Black people didn't just come from Africa.
no.
From Haiti and, where else? Jamaica. I mean, there's so many areas. And so when I had a neighbor of mine once say, don't call me Black, call me African American. And I'm like, but how was I to know that you're from Africa? Like there's Black people that live in other countries, like, do I expect you to call me Italian, Irish, Scottish, and, Polish? Like, are you expected to, I'm a mutt over here. So that's a lot for somebody to know, but it's just odd.
Most everybody here has at least some heritage from another country.
Right.
I'm probably as close to a pureblood German as you're going to find in this country. And even I have 12% Scottish. So, it's I wouldn't call myself a German American.
Right.
Well, and the one thing I think that unites all of us is the fact that we all, inherently want freedom. We all inherently want, to have the binds that are, these invisible shackles and these corporate shackles. We want them off of us. We want to be released from all of that. But at the same time, we're called to engage in this assembling process.
Yeah.
Right? Which seems like counterintuitive to the goal of being free when you agree to volunteer and serve and take on roles and all of this. And the other interesting thing about assembling is this idea of standing up our own courts, and that we, are muddling our way through trying to figure out specifically how do we deal with things like criminality when we're trying to empower people to be free, yet when they're free, sometimes they don't always make the best decisions or the best choices, right? They don't take the best choices. So, which actually leads to the next question, which is, could you explain the difference between criminal procedure and their pleadings under public law versus common law procedures and pleadings under private law?
Let's finish our first question.
Okay.
Because it's really two parts, and they do seem to be a little bit at odds with each other. You can set yourself free, but you also need to give freedom to others. And therein lies a rub for many people that still has to be overcome. Because oftentimes what happens is, I describe it as the prisoner. The prisoner lives in their little cell their entire lives. They're bounded by these walls of identity that tells them they are this, they are that, they believe this, they believe that. They have this prison cell, and it's mental, but it's very effective. And a lot of it is nowadays being promoted not only by the churches and the governments, but by the media.
Right. Yeah.
For example, did you know that the motto of the BBC is listen and obey?
Yes.
I mean, think about it. So, we have these little prisons, and then we break out of these prisons. Somebody comes along, somebody like me knocks on the door of the prison and says, hey, it's okay to come out now. Maybe they even shoehorn the door in and open up the door and leave it standing there so that you can peek out and look around and go, oh my, boy, this world doesn't look anything like what I thought it looked like. And all these things that I believed it's pure bunk. And oh my, I am so scared. I am just so scared. I want to go right back into my little cell and close the door against all of this unpleasant reality, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And it happens that way culturally too. It happens in the next sense, which you brought up, which is, how do you form a collaborative government of all these people who are suddenly free thinkers and doers, and who've taken the challenge and who've examined their own lives and found it wanting. And you toss them all in a room all together, and all of it's so new, and they're struggling with so many things. Well, a lot of these things are just going to come up, almost like, I don't know, like bubbles floating to the surface of a pond, where suddenly, all of a sudden, they realize that, oh, well, there's another thing that I misunderstood, or that I was lied to about, or that I didn't know, that's changing the way that I'm seeing myself and seeing my world. And usually this is an unpleasant and scary thing when it happens. And it can happen to whole groups of people who are going through this same experience of expanding their view and their knowledge base and empowering themselves. It can happen to a group as well as it can happen to an individual. And when you get all these people who are suddenly waking up, we call it, when they're suddenly waking up to themselves, they're also waking up to their world, and they're beginning to try to grapple with all this through a group effort, right? The assemblies. It's very challenging. It's very difficult.
Yeah, it is.
And yet, if you follow it, just like grief, just like the process of grief has been defined and identified, and all the different stages of grief have been neatly categorized for us to be able to follow our own progress through this process. Well, it's the same way with waking up and finding out that you have choices you didn't ever know that you had, and that there are things about this world that are phony, that you never thought of as being phony, and all the rest of it. There is a stage at each point, and you can watch people do it, where suddenly something traumatic that happens to them or to a friend or a family member will wake them up, and they'll go, hey, this isn't right. This isn't the country I live in. This isn't the dream I've been fed. This isn't freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's as simple as you're lying in bed on April 14th and you don't have your taxes done.
How many April 14th did I go through feeling like that?
Yes, I think we've all been there.
You're living in terror. Even if you're an honest person, you're living in terror that you might have made some small mistake that could be trumped up into a multi-million-dollar fine, or that the IRS is going to show up at your door and threaten you, or all this stuff. And you realize, I'm not living in a free life. I'm not living in a free country. What kind of bogus BS is this? And then you start looking, and you see the need for change, and so you go looking for solutions, and you stumble into one of our assemblies, and only God knows what you may be thinking at that moment when you walk through the door, or what your expectations may be. Most people coming into our assemblies, their only knowledge or understanding of government is what they've experienced. Not what they were supposed to experience, but what they actually have experienced. And so they walk through the door, and they make very common mistakes, like thinking that the Federation is the federal government when it's not. They just displace things. Another thing is having an entitlement or a victimhood attitude, where they've been kind of pushed into those two roles of either I'm entitled and where's my service, or you wind up with people that are searching for a way to make themselves look pitiful and victimized, and find a new crutch, a new way to wheedle something else out of everybody else. Feels sorry for me, and these are the common kinds of things that happen because of the way we've been processed and socialized in this country. And you can watch them go through the scared and angry, and then in the denial, first they're scared, then they're angry, then they go into denial, and they go, at that stage they all go, oh, this is all just crud, I'm going to go back into my little cell and shut the door. So then after they progress beyond the denial, they get to a stage of acceptance, but oftentimes that stage of acceptance comes with paralysis. It's like, okay, I'm like the dog on the floor. I'm on my back, belly up, all four paws in the air, just kind of going, all right, well, I accept that this is true, but I'm helpless. I don't know what to do about it. And, and so all those first 5 stages are pretty useless in terms of an organization. All of those first reactions are, they're problematic for the organization. They don't help the organization. And they're all just the necessary steps, kind of a grinding, individualized process that we all go through that finally leads us to what John Adams called commitment. And that is that simple stage of standing there in front of the mirror and saying, okay, well, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it, but I do know that I'm not going to be an accomplice to crime.
Right.
I'm not going to just sit here and let these criminals get away with it. And so at the stage of commitment, you've got somebody who is looking in a self-aware and organized sort of way at, okay, what can I do? And what can I do in concert with other people to, fix this problem?
Yeah.
Okay, so it takes a while for people to grind their way through that entire wake-up process to the point where they've got their first cup of coffee and they're going, all right, clear the decks, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Right.
And so now we've got people in all 50 states who have gone through this process and have hit the commitment level and are now, educating themselves about the solutions and the problems. And they're finding that, as good a solution as we have that was bequeathed to us by our ancestors and our forefathers, we don't necessarily understand immediately how the machine works. And I've compared it to, you've got this barn sitting out on the back 40, and in the barn is this giant old machine that hasn't been, started up and used for generations. It's just been sitting there kind of dry rotting. And here we are, we're rebuilding it. We're learning how it works. We're lubing and oiling and firing her up, right?
Yep.
And it's a confusing process. It's something where even those who have studied it and who have researched it thoroughly still have questions because it hasn't been done in so long. And,
Right.
Just this past week, we've had a couple of really burning things come up where, for example, the difference between state assemblies and county assemblies. There's a certain, I won't say typical, but there are a certain group of people that have a hard time distinguishing the fact that there's a difference between a state assembly and the jurisdiction in which a state assembly works and a county assembly and the jurisdiction that a county assembly works. Okay? And we've had all sorts of misunderstandings about the Federation being the federal government. No, the Federation is what the federal government was named after.
Right.
Okay. So these are all things that serve to cause confusions. And, even the best of us, even those of us who have studied 50 years, still have problems. When we were writing the General Assembly handbook, we had a body of research and references and papers that we looked at, and they were all talking about the states, the states, the states. And well, so in our understanding, a state is a physically defined state of the union, right? The state that we all think of, Maryland, New York, California, right? No, they were talking about states of states. They were talking about the so-called Confederate States. Okay, but because in the paperwork it was talking about states, we didn't immediately catch it. Even though what we were reading didn't jive with certain other things, the use of the word state meant and still means something specific. And their use of it was atypical. And what it was just sloppy language. Over time, they started calling the Confederate States states. And so we had the misunderstanding originally that you had to be a landowner and you had to be white and you had to be 21 to be an elector.
Yeah, and you just covered that on our Monday night webinar. I know
Right.
you and Terry were talking about that, and that was really great news to hear.
Well,
A lot of great confusion about that.
yeah, well, but that was the Confederate States. It wasn't the Federation States.
Right, which makes sense too, because
That's
that's
what
the
it was.
business, right? That was the business aspect.
Yeah, that was the commercial aspect.
Right.
Yeah.
International trade has always been the province of the Federation. But if you stop and think about it, there have always been those who have had different views about issues of property and issues of race. And that's where the Confederacy went astray.
Mhm.
That's where they went in favor of slavery. And the problem is that when you leave slavery alive in any corner, it can come out and grow like cancer, and pretty
Yep.
soon everybody's enslaved.
Yep.
And we do ourselves a disservice when we enslave anyone, because that means that we too could be enslaved.
That's right.
And it was quite interesting learning about the 14th Amendment, where they created a different citizenship and then changed the meaning of the word person.
Yep.
I remember being introduced to all of this and going back and reading the 14th Amendment without knowing that they changed the meaning of the word person. And I remember reading it multiple times and saying, I don't see the problem here.
Right.
I don't see the problem. And then when that little piece where person actually means corporation, legal entity, then I was like, oh, now it makes sense. That pulled it all together for me. So, but all those little things, just the slightest little change in something, and it has a whole new different meaning. And that's, I think, where they got us, right?
Right. And so I think that we've put in an hour here, and
Wow.
I know how fast it goes.
It goes by way too fast.
So I think we have just is it okay, Anna, if we just have just a few more questions, and maybe you can.
Well, I would, except that I'm getting really uncomfortable sitting here on this book.
Oh. Oh man. Well, we have to have a second one with you, because there's a whole string of questions
Sure.
from people on the assembly to we have a bunch of questions, and if we can reschedule a second one, that would be awesome.
Sure, we can do as many of these as we need to.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
And I know our assembly would like to extend an invitation if you wanted to attend one of our meetings. So I'm sure you're a very busy lady, but if you are, if you have time, we would love to have you join our assembly meeting. And
Well,
Michelle and I most certainly would love to have you as many times as you're willing to come on here with us.
let me tell you a little secret. I have a cherished dream, and that is to visit absolutely every single one of the assemblies in person.
Yay! Oh my God, we're going to make that happen.
We would absolutely love that.
We might have to wait until after the snowstorms in Alaska.
Well, yeah, but we may have to wait until all of the bank stuff is settled. This is huge. The bank stuff is huge. You have no idea
Yeah,
what that's been like. But I think that every assembly stays in my heart. And people send donations in, and I look at the return addresses, and I think about Arkansas, and I think about Kansas, and I think about Delaware and New Jersey and California, and each one, I think about each one, and all of the wonderful people that there are in every single one of those states. And I think about those states, their physicality, their history, their landmarks, their resources, their state parks, their national parks, all these different things. And I build up this sense of what America is, not in the big scale that I was taught in school, to kind of just think of it as a thing and put it on a shelf, but thinking about it in terms of what each state is physically and what all the people contribute to that in each state. And you realize the tremendous strength that this country has and that each state represents within that fabric. And it's mind-blowing. But the other thing about it is it's very humbling, because you realize that you have brothers and sisters and sons and daughters and cousins and uncles and aunts and grandparents and people all over this country who are Americans. And, they come from all over the world, of all races, all creeds, all colors, and they're still all Americans.
That's right.
It's amazing.
Yes.
It's utterly amazing.
And many of them that love this country so much that I do believe that once they finally get this missing piece of the puzzle of what's gone on in their country,
Right.
I think that once they fully can wrap their head around it and go through the grieving process, like you explained, I think they will come around eventually, and we'll have our land and soil jurisdiction, populated, more populated. And and that will be a beautiful time. I hope I'm alive to see it.
Well, I hope that everybody out there who's in the assemblies now is planning out a real good orientation, and I guess I would say counseling service, so that when new people come into the assemblies, you can help them through that grieving process, and that recognize that, oh, they're scared, oh, they're in denial, oh, so that you can deal with them personally, one-on-one, where they're at, and bring them through to that commitment process where it all comes together and the pedal hits the metal.
Yeah.
And so
Anna, before you leave, I'm gonna, we've had your website going across the bottom of the screen, because I just feel like that's such a wealth of information on there. I mean, over what you're up to 4,400. I don't know how many articles, but and I love the search engine. So if anybody's looking for a topic, they could just put, I know when I was learning, I would just put IRS, and there's a whole slew of articles. If there was a person that I came across that was giving information, I was like, I wonder what Anna has to say about this guy. And I'd go and I'd put that name in the search engine, and sometimes they came up, sometimes they didn't, but it's just a really great wealth of a resource for people. But I also wanted to plug your new podcast that you have going on with North Carolina. I'm going to put that up here now. And that's Tuesdays, Anna?
Tuesdays. Yep.
Tuesdays. And they can find the podcast on YouTube. Her name is Nitty the Pharmacist, and they're with the North Carolina Assembly. And Anna's starting these podcasts where people can, it's a live event, so people can, write in questions and get them answered. And so it's kind of a nice venue that you're doing with North Carolina. So I just want to make sure I plug that. And thank you once again for taking the time. I know you had a very rough day today, so we appreciate you taking the time anyway.
Well, thank you, girls, for being here and for doing what you're doing. I'm just one person, and it's the entire effort of the country, all the people, that makes a difference. And we are making a difference.
Yeah.
We really, truly are. I can see it very clearly from where I'm sitting in the international venue. We've made tremendous strides just in the past year. So keep it up. Keep moving.
Yes.
We've got that wheel rolling now. We're just going to go there skiing, Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and prayers for Jim.
Absolutely.
Many prayers for
prayers
him.
for your family. Thank you so much, Anna, for all that you do for us, by the way. I know that you've taken a lot of hits. And I just got to say, your skin must be thick as leather, because you take them some harsh ones, and we just want to say a great big thank you for all you do and for taking that and still showing up for us and doing everything that you're doing. So thank you for that.
Well, just remember, old age isn't for sissies.
I love it. All right. We'll see you next time, Anna. Have a good evening.
Take care, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.